Attention, everybody. The views and opinions expressed on the show are not necessarily those of Acts Ministry, Acts Media Group, and/or their affiliate and supported ministries and/or nonprofits. It's that time again. It's the Happy Hour with your host, Dr. Paul Collins, and his lovely wife, Nancy. Here they are to talk about COVID, politics, and the Christian mindset. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the info coming your way. Take it away, Dr. Paul.
I can hardly wait to get to it. This is going to be a great day. Oh, and a great happy hour broadcast with old Dr. Paul and sweet little Miss Nancy. I recommend right now you get on the horn, call somebody, tell them to tune in. You don't want to miss this. Don't want to miss it. Don't want to miss it. Good morning, Nancy. Saw you a few minutes ago before we went on the air, and then I saw you before that as we came down the hall together toward the studio. And I saw you before that in the elevator, and then I saw you before that in the car. I saw you before that when we got up this morning.
Almost 43 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
Holy Spirit told me that I needed somebody to help me raise my daughter.
Well.
And I told Jesus, well, Jesus, I'm not going here, I'm not going there. Here's the only three places, and that was it.
This is now renamed The Love Story.
That's right. That is exactly right.
It's the happy hour. Hello, Shirley Simpson, dearly beloved First Secretary living in St. Joseph, Missouri. Bless your heart. Always tell your family and friends all over the country, and you have a lot of them, to watch the happy hour. And hello, Jerry Chambers, my teenage friend, church member in St. Joe years ago, retired school administrator now in Chesterfield, Missouri. Jerry, make it to Springfield, which I call Springburg, USA, and stop by and see me again. It's been a while. And then hello to a brand new friend up in Northeast Missouri, Tom Seaver. Tom is an amazing man. If he ever gets to Springfield on the right day, I'm going to have him as a guest on this show because he's a Vietnam vet and he has stories all kinds to tell. Tom, tell Lynn Purdy and all the folks at Lakewood Church hello for old Dr. Paul and sweet little Miss Nancy, please. And hello, Judy Nickel down in Texas and Galen Garrett in Texas. Hello, Sandy up in the Salisbury, Missouri area. We were privileged to have Sandy and a friend of hers stop by and see us last weekend, I believe. And what a reunion it was. Always glad to see Sandy, always glad to hear from her. And hello, yes, Nance.
And what about Dr. Gage in Texas?
Well, I'm going to get there.
Okay.
Meantime, I'm focusing on Illinois with Tammy Renee Harris, former Miss Chicago gospel singer, can also sing pop music. She can sing country better than Patsy Cline. She is a marvel and a great Christian lady. Hello to Tammy and her mother Dolores over in Illinois. And hello then to all the folks in Lubbock area of Texas, which is on the capstone. The Dr. Gage, the medical doctor, and his wife and family, Lyle Way, Christian novelist, Mark and Deborah Elvers, who look after church out that way.
Yeah, and Dr. Gage prays for people and they get healed.
That's right. He has a huge private practice, and he's also an adjunct professor at Texas Tech University School of Medicine, and he prays for his patients, every one of them. And God does wonderful things. Mm-hmm. Also, hello to Dr. Hal Higdon. He's been a guest of ours. He's chancellor of Ozark Technical Community College here in Springfield. And by the way, for those of you out of the area and out of the country, around the world, we are in Springfield, Missouri, southwest quadrant of the state of Missouri, which is right in the middle of the United States of America, which puts us at the center of the world. And we're in the middle of Springfield right now. So, folks, you want to see the center of the world? You're looking at it right here. Anyway, I call my adopted hometown fondly Springburg, USA. Because even though we're a city of 166,000 plus and a metropolitan area of about 250,000, it still has a nice small town feel. So it's Springburg, USA. I want to say hello to some folks that will get the word if they're not watching live. Carolyn Jeffries up in North Central Missouri, one of my classmates from high school days, and Betty Jo Mowry right here in Springburg, USA, another one of my classmates from the good old days in the 50s. Happy days. All right. All the greetings have been handled, basically. If I missed you, write to me. You can do that. There's a mailing address for me on my website, and the website is simple. DR, that's abbreviation for doctor. I had to put that on there because there are other Paul Collinses in the world. One of them's a great artist, and that's not me. So it's drpaulcollins@sbcglobal.net as an email. The website is drpaulcollins.com, and there's a mailing address on there. Be glad to hear from you. And while I'm recommending websites, I mentioned Tammy Renee Harris a moment ago. Check out her website, tammyrenee.com. Find some great music on there. Samples of music plus some full-length things that she sings, and really good. And you can watch her and listen to her. And then also Acts Media Group. Don't forget that. Acts Media Group is what we're doing right now, which includes also not only radio, that's why we wear these headsets, but television, which you're watching now, and the Real News Review newspaper, which is online. So Acts Media Group, as a department of Acts Ministry, is where to go, actsmediagroup.com. Now, Acts is ACTS, not AXE. ACTS, actsmediagroup.com.
That's like the book of Acts.
Yeah, in fact, when you and I started Acts Ministry nearly 28 years ago now, it was based on the book of Acts in the Bible. The first book after you get past the four Gospels. It contains the early history of the church. It contains the history of the early church, I should say. Well, today, as Matt indicated earlier, I think he did, we're going to talk about the coronavirus. We're going to talk about a little bit of politics. We're going to talk about a Christian worldview on some things. So I want to begin with the COVID. I have shown you this little newsletter months ago. I get it every month. There's 5,600,000 readers monthly, and this is the October edition, so they're running a little behind time. I'm looking for more editions soon. There's a major article in here by a medical doctor who is a professor of medicine at Stanford University, and he is both an MD, medical doctor, and he has a PhD in economics, and he's a research guy. And he's a co-author of what's called the Great Barrington Declaration, Barrington Declaration. I hope you have pencil and paper handy. Write this stuff down, because that Barrington Declaration is vitally important to our understanding of infectious disease, and epidemiologists and public health officials, their concern about these diseases. Let me tell you what this guy says about COVID. Now, understand, Nancy and I, we wear the mask. We adhere to all the civil law, and we try to adhere to spiritual law concerning any of these threats to our well-being. I'm in the high-risk group. Nancy's in the high-risk group, not as high as mine, but she's there. And so we do use caution because we believe in being good stewards, and God has given us a body to live in while we're here in this world, and we want to take care of it. By the way, speaking of this world, a friend of mine, a man ordained in the same denomination I was ordained in years ago, passed away last Sunday. He was 3 years my senior. He was 88, and he had been a hospital chaplain as well as a pastor prior to that. He developed at some point later in life Lou Gehrig disease, and he passed away last Sunday. Our condolences to the family and friends of the Reverend Paul Hunt. He was a seminary classmate of mine, by the way, as I mentioned. Anyway, back to the COVID. This guy who's writing this is writing it in Imprimis, which is a publication of Hillsdale College. And Hillsdale College is a Christian school, and it's very old, and it is conservative. It has its name because it is in Hillsdale, Michigan. It's been around a long time. They do not openly promote this, but I found it interesting when I researched it that it is a liberal arts college, 4-year school, highly accredited, and it's owned and operated by Free Will Baptist. Interesting. Now, Free Will Baptist is very different than Southern Baptist and some others in that their name says it all, free will. In other words, no eternal security. You get off the beaten path or you reject Christ, you could lose your salvation. But anyway, this guy is writing for this publication. He is not a part of Hillsdale College. He talks about the COVID-19 fatality rate. There's a difference between COVID cases and COVID infections. Mm-hmm. Now, what that means is you can have COVID cases. They are diagnosed.
Yeah, they show signs and symptoms.
Right, and they've been diagnosed. These are people who actually medically are told you are sick with the COVID. Mm-hmm. In early March, that's early this year, the case fatality rate in the U.S. was roughly 3%. Nearly 3 out of every 100 people who were identified as cases of COVID died from it. Compare that to today, and the fatality rate is known to be less than 1/2 of 1%. That's a lot of improvement. So the COVID fatality rate is much closer to 0.2 or 0.3%. And in early March, we weren't identifying most of the people who had been infected by COVID. Mm-hmm. So that's the reason why there's a difference in the rates, because they are identifying more people with COVID. Now, one of the things that this guy points out about COVID is that when some folks talk about the economic impact, they're not being heartless or cruel. They're just facing facts. There has been an economic impact. Mm-hmm. And to the extent, you see, economics then begins to affect food supply and mortgages and everything else. The United Nations has estimated that 130 million additional people will starve this year as a result of the economic damage from the shutdowns. Now we're always going to have people starving. Apparently, remember Jesus said you'll always have the poor with you. They're with us. But this year there'll be 130 million more because of the lockdowns. Now, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this because by now people are beginning to get bored with COVID and so forth. But I did read on the news yesterday that our city of Springfield, Missouri, is now the law enforcement people will be writing tickets for those who are not wearing a mask and they're in places of business or wherever where they should be wearing a mask. They'll be writing tickets, which means a fine. Who's at risk? Well, they have found that there's 1,000-fold, that's 1,000 times, difference between the mortality rate in older people, that is 70 and up, that's you, that's me, mm-hmm. a thousand-fold difference between us and the mortality rate in children. So you and I are 1,000 times more likely to die if we get COVID than some child, and even people who are much younger than us. COVID is not extremely deadly for children. There are children who die from the flu too, by the way, and die from other diseases. But for older people, it is much more deadly than the seasonal flu. So we face up to that. Now, never before, and I didn't realize this, have lockdowns been tried as a method of disease control.
Yeah.
Now the big word out there is lockdown, lockdown, lockdown. Churches, theaters, so forth. So then there's this big discussion that's been controversial about herd immunity. That is, if enough people get the disease, they begin to develop an immunity to it, and after a while, the human race becomes more immune to it. He says herd immunity is not a strategy to try to handle COVID. It's a biological fact. Even when we have a vaccine, we will be relying on herd immunity as an endpoint for this epidemic. So, and by the way, statistics show that without mandatory vaccination, there's a large percentage of the people who say that they will not be vaccinated. So that means they could walk around as carriers and spreaders, I guess, and so forth. So herd immunity does come into play, and it must. That's part of God's plan, obviously. The strategy of herd immunity is to not let people die, but to protect the vulnerable. He says we know who is vulnerable and we know who is not vulnerable. To continue to act as if we do not know these things makes no sense. So when I get communication from folks who say, and they're of a vulnerable age, well, I'm not wearing a mask and I'm not going to get it and I'm not taking the vaccine. There's a lot of really good Christian experts who say, let's not be foolish about this. Let's use the gifts that God has provided. I had a communication yesterday via Facebook. Some guy isn't 70, but he's probably 60, who's very opposed to the vaccine, said in no way would he take it. And yet he works in the public, and he is a very, very conservative person. I wish he would change his mind. That's just my opinion. Some of you are going to say, oh, Collins, I'm not taking that vaccine. Well, I am. I'm going to do it. Anyway, at 85, what do I have to lose? It's not what I have to lose, it's what I have to gain.
That's right.
I either gain a better life here and now, or I gain heaven. Either way, it's win-win. Enough on that. Another result of the lockdown, get this, is that people stop bringing their children in to be immunized against diseases like diphtheria. I remember when diphtheria was a major threat. Whooping cough. I remember whooping cough. And polio. I remember that. But many people stopped bringing their children in to be inoculated because of the fear of the COVID-19. Large numbers of Americans, even though they had had cancer and needed chemotherapy, didn't come in for treatment because they were more afraid of COVID than cancer. Others have skipped recommended cancer screenings. And he says we're going to see a rise in cancer and cancer deaths as a consequence. We're even seeing a higher number of deaths from diabetes due to people missing their diabetic monitoring. And a lot has been said, and a lot of attention been given to the mental health aspects of people who were not created to be all alone, but they find themselves being that way. Anyway, I'll wrap this up by saying that the Great Barrington Declaration, which you can look up online, Barrington, has been signed by over 43,000 medical and public health scientists and medical practitioners. 43,000 testimonies concerning infectious disease and what to do about it. He says, together, I think we can get on the other side of this pandemic, but we have to fight back. We're at a place where our civilization is at risk, where the bonds that unite us are at risk of being torn. We shouldn't be afraid. We should respond to the COVID virus rationally, protect the vulnerable, treating the people who get infected and treat them compassionately, and develop a vaccine. And while doing these things, we should bring back the civilization that we had so that the cure does not end up being worse than the disease. From this little pamphlet, Imprimis, from Hillsdale College, Hillsdale, Michigan, and the writer, man who's an MD and a PhD, Stanford University. All right, Nancy, your thoughts about COVID before we move on to some political matters.
I was just curious, seeing as how I worked in a nursing home so long, that wonder how they're going to do if everyone that is I'll say a resident in a nursing home or in a long-term care facility area, if they will end up getting the vaccine.
Well, they want frontline health workers to get the vaccine, and right on the heels of that, apparently, high-risk groups, starting with nursing facilities and long-term care facilities, followed then by folks like us who are still living at home, but we are of the highly vulnerable age, working their way through this. All right, now that we've bent your ear and your eyes about the COVID, I want to remind you that we take this very seriously, because one of my very best friends of all time and my associate pastor just about 3 weeks ago passed away as a result of COVID. So we do not take it lightly. We take it very seriously. I am angry at COVID because it took my friend Bruce Pearson. Still cannot imagine life without Bruce. Can't imagine our little church gatherings without Bruce coming in and taking his ball cap off and rubbing his bald head and saying, well, Dr. Paul, I remember to remember, and he'll tell me a story. Or how much my neighbor, Kim Rowley, enjoyed Bruce. And Bruce always called him Riley instead of Rowley. He called him Riley. And how much Kim enjoyed Bruce's stories, funny stories, especially the one about the preacher who inadvertently did a wonderful graveside service for a septic tank. Did you guys ever hear him tell that story? Oh, it's great. So there's a lot of wonderful, I'd rather think about the wonderful memories of my friend Bruce than the others, but I'll never forget that I'm probably the last person outside of the hospital that he talked with before he passed away, and maybe the last one, period, because after he talked to me that morning, he went to sleep, and he woke up in the arms of Jesus. All right, I don't want to get all shook up here. So we take this COVID thing serious. I hope you will. This little publication's free, and every month something different. And this Hillsdale College, by the way, which you can find at hillsdale.edu, they offer free online classes in every topic right now. They're offering one having to do with philosophy, but they're really liberal arts classes. Now, politically, at the time this is being produced as a program.
Hey, just think of this. Here comes another parallel. Just like the COVID has been a big, big deal, so is this presidential election
Yeah.
and all the crud and corruption that surrounds it.
Watch your language, young lady.
I'm being good.
Anyway, you're right. There is a parallel here. So right now we're doing this program on December the 11th, 2020, and the president and a legal team, they're trying to get some hearings before the Supreme Court, and but not only that, the Attorney General of Texas has been joined by the Attorney General of Missouri and Arkansas and a total of 17 other states, and then Texas, I guess, makes 18. They are suing other states where there has been pretty strong evidence of improprieties concerning voting and counting, etc., because their position is that means if they cheated, then their votes were abrogated or nullified. So you need to think about that. But anyway, that's what's happening right now currently.
I know, but then you think too, if they're exactly what they find out, maybe the next election, whatever that would be, with the use of whether it's paper ballots or those Dominion machines, all that should be taken care of.
Well, we would hope, but that will not happen unless somebody wins one of these cases. Now, I want to make it perfectly clear, folks, that some of you watching this are probably just really happy that Vice President Biden is positioned right now to become president. He is not yet president-elect. That doesn't happen until after the Electoral College. Some of you watching and listening, you're very upset at the results of the election. I understand both sides, but I can tell you this. I never in my lifetime have seen anything quite like this. And Donald J. Trump is the 14th president that I've lived under. So I've seen a lot of presidential elections. Keep in mind that when we went to the polls and voted, we were not voting for a president. We were voting for people who would, in turn, vote for the president. That's the way the Electoral College works. Now, there is a timeline that's involved here, and this is why this thing gets to be a real sticky wicket. By December the 8th, which was 3 days ago, the states were supposed to resolve any controversies before the meeting of the electors. By law, they are to resolve their controversies at least 6 days before the meeting of the electors. So that deadline has passed. That means that states must make final decisions in any controversies over the appointment of their electors at least 6 days before the meeting of the electors. This is so their electoral votes will be presumed valid when presented to Congress. Decisions by states' courts are conclusive if decided under laws enacted before Election Day. The problem is some of them have been operating under laws that they put together rules and regulations, procedures following Election Day. But that date, December 8th, has passed. Now, December 14th, just 3 days away. Electors vote in their states. The electors meet in their respective states, like in Missouri, the ones that, since Donald Trump won the popular vote in Missouri, he gets the electoral votes. Those electors meet in their respective states and vote for president and vice president on separate ballots. Now, which means unless the electors are bound by law, which some are and some aren't, they could vote for Donald Trump for president, and others would vote for somebody else for vice president. Well, the electors record their votes on 6 certificates of vote, which are paired with the 6 remaining certificates of ascertainment. The electors sign, seal, and certify 6 sets of electoral votes. A set of electoral votes consists of 1 certificate of ascertainment and 1 certificate of vote. Now, if you want to get this information, go online. That's where I found it. There's a lot of law here. Then, now, that's coming up 3 days from now. On December 23rd, day before Christmas Eve, the electoral votes arrive. The electoral votes, that is, the certificates of vote, must be received by the President of the Senate and the archivist, or archivist, I pronounce it archivist, no later than 9 days after the meeting of the electors. If votes are lost or delayed, the archivist may take extraordinary measures to retrieve duplicate originals. So the President of the Senate is the Vice President of the United States. The archivist, nobody knows. I don't know who that is.
Hopefully it's not Pelosi.
Not in the Senate, no, of course not. It's not an office holder. They have to receive these votes, these electoral votes, certificates of vote, no later than 9 days after the meeting of the electors. So that's coming up December 23rd. If votes are lost or delayed, not the President of the Senate, but the archivist may take extraordinary measures to retrieve duplicate originals. So that could become a sticky wicket. Mm-hmm. This is a complicated procedure. Then on or before January the 3rd of 2021, the archivist transfers certificates to Congress. As the new Congress assembles, the archivist transmits sets of certificates to Congress as requested. This generally happens when the Senate does not receive its set of certificates on time. The transfer occurs in late December, early January, when the legal staff meets with representatives of the Secretary of the Senate and the Clerk of the House. It's getting more complicated. This has to be on or before January 3rd. It's the archivist who transfers certificates to Congress. It is no one else. Who is the archivist? I don't know. Need to look it up and find out. Who is this man and woman with such power? January the 6th, 2021. That's when Congress counts the electoral votes. Congress meets in joint session. That means the House and the Senate meet together to count the electoral votes. The Vice President, as President of the Senate, presides over the count and announces the results of the Electoral College vote. Now, I remember back in 1961 actually, when Richard Nixon was Vice President, he was presiding over the Senate and had to count the votes and drop the anvil and declare that John F. Kennedy, his opponent, had been elected President of the United States. The transfer occurs in late December or early January, etc. Then they meet together to count the votes. The Vice President presides over the count, announces the results of the Electoral College vote. In this case, it'll be Vice President Mike Pence will preside over that. The President of the Senate then declares which persons, if any, have been elected President and Vice President of the United States. So it is possible that no one will get the required 270 electoral votes. Now, if that happens, we enter into a crisis of government, obviously. If no president, if any objections to the electoral votes are made, they must be submitted in writing and be signed by at least one member of the House and one senator. This is going to happen, obviously. If objections are presented, the House and Senate withdraw to their respective chambers to consider the merits of the objections under procedures set out in federal law. So that means on January the 6th, we probably will not know who's been elected, because it goes without saying that if he's pushed it this far, President Trump will have one member of the House and one member of the Senate who will object to the electoral votes. So that means then the House goes back to the House, the Senate sets alone, they have to set a time, and they'll drag it out to get together. And
like they have all year
well, of course.
on something. Yeah.
Well, listen to this.
Until, you might say, till hell freezes over.
If no presidential candidate wins at least 270 electoral votes, which is a majority of 538 available votes, under the 12th Amendment to the Constitution of the House of Representatives, under the Constitution, the House of Representatives decides the presidential election. Who controls the House of Representatives?
I don't know. My goodness.
Nancy Pelosi.
Oh, man.
80-year-old woman, multimillionaire from a district in San Francisco. Isn't that interesting? The lady who was caught on video camera when there was a lockdown in San Francisco with her hair wet and a towel around her shoulders because she was at a beauty shop getting a haircut deal. So she may decide the presidential election. Wonder who she would decide for.
Who in the cat here votes for her so they can get her out?
Well, she's elected by her district, and then the members of her party elect her as the majority leader or as the Speaker of the House. So therefore, that's how that happens. If necessary, the House, that is the House of Representatives, would elect the president by majority vote, choosing from among the three candidates who received the greatest number of electoral votes. The vote would be taken by state. Now, by the way, the three candidates, there will be some other candidates receive maybe, no, not this year. No other third-party candidate did not get any. There was a time when that happened, when Ross Perot was running against Bill Clinton and George H.W. Bush, and Bill Clinton won. And he won because Ross Perot took votes away from George H.W. Bush, obviously. But anyway, the vote would be taken by state, with each state having one vote. That's different. I was thinking about them having a majority. Taken by state, with each state having one vote. The District of Columbia does not vote because it doesn't have voting members in the House of Representatives.
Oh, that's why somebody would want to make District of Columbia a state.
Well, sure, and then that would give them two more senators because every state has two senators. If no vice presidential candidate wins at least 270 electoral votes, a majority, which would be a majority of 538 available votes, under the 12th Amendment, the Senate elects the vice president. So the House elects the president, the Senate elects the vice president. If necessary, the Senate would elect the vice president by majority vote, choosing between the two candidates who received the greatest number of electoral votes. Each senator would have one vote. Now, if the Democrats control the House, Republicans control the Senate, then you could end up with a Democrat president and a Republican vice president. How about that for a scenario? Then, January the 20th, 2021, at noon, that would be Eastern time, the president-elect and vice president-elect take the oath of office and become the president of the United States and vice president of the United States, respectively, if they get everything done in time. If not, then it's delayed and delayed. And there's always the possibility that there could be enough mess that there would have to be some provision for a new election.
I wondered about that.
So we are in different times. Nobody knows exactly what's going to happen because we haven't really been exactly this way before. We have been close to it back when Rutherford B. Hayes and Samuel Tilden were running, and Rutherford Hayes won by like one vote in the House of Representatives or something, but nonetheless, we haven't really been this way before. Interesting. So, Now, I hope you're still with us after all this, as what my nephew would say, after all this rigmarole. I have a nephew up in north central Missouri, and that's one of his words. If there's a confusion or a lot of stuff going on, they say a rigmarole. Now then, what is the worldview, the Christian view of all this stuff? A virus, and the election that's up in the air and maybe more up in the air. What is the Christian point of view? Well, Christians, like the rest of the world, are divided on this issue. And by Christian, I will admit I'm using the term loosely because Christian can refer to everyone who claims to be Christian, no matter what their church affiliation may be, their church connection, their church attendance prior to the COVID, etc. And no matter what, whether they have a theology or not, or whether they understand Christian doctrine or not, and if they do, if their doctrine is different than somebody else's, and so forth. So we're using the term Christian in the broadest way possible. The Christian worldview, which means we have some people who call themselves Christians who identify very strongly with extreme socialism, moderate socialism, and barely socialism. We have people who call themselves Christians who are extreme in opposition to socialism, some moderately opposed, and some who are barely opposed. They don't really understand what's going on. So Christians have a variety of mindsets about this. We have some what we call liberal denominations as far as their leadership is concerned. And sometimes, Nancy, I think we misuse the term liberal and conservative. Because, for instance, if you're hungry and you get a liberal helping of food, then that liberal is a good word. If I'm willing to accept people who and love people who don't agree with me, that's a good use of the term liberal. But when you narrow it down to politics, it comes down to communism, socialism, and all the way up to an edge. And the word conservative then is all the way from being very opposed to communism, very opposed to socialism, and so forth. Extremes on both sides and some that almost meet in the middle. But we have some very so-called liberal denominations who have very wide open arms concerning social issues involving sexuality, involving politics, involving their willingness to accept abortion. Then we have some groups that are conservative who have a point of view that's in regard to sexuality, narrows it down to that it is a matter of procreation, a God-given gift, and therefore marriage is for a man and woman, male and female, and so forth. I don't have to paint a picture about this. You understand what I'm talking about? Mm-hmm. Well, we do have then very liberal denominations who have a tendency to support a liberal political agenda, and conservative Christians who support conservative political agendas. So out of all of this spread, there's another group that stands out. They are a part of the conservative group. They stand out because they are among the, I think, the most outspoken And they are the ones who frame things that are happening around the world in terms of what we call Bible prophecy. And it's as if they look into the Bible and find various verses of Scripture to support what's happening. For instance, there's a lot of talk about the book of the Revelation being understood in terms of the Old Testament book of Daniel. I don't want to lose people here, but you understand that there are those who have a theology and a philosophy of the end times, and these things are, some people are expecting, for instance, to be wonderfully taken out of this world before things get real tough.
Because they don't want to have to face the tough.
Well, it's called,
which means that you look at the bottom line, and they need to be looking at their heart.
That's right. But we have those who say they're going to escape all the bad stuff. Well,
and they're so proud of it.
On the other hand, we have a pandemic going on, and we're still here. And then we have those who say, well, we'll get out in the middle of 7 years of bad trouble, and those who say we get out at the end, others who say we don't get out at all. Okay, we have all these viewpoints. In 1 minute, let me tell you that there are 5 or 6 different ways that scholars look at, for instance, the book of the Revelation. And I've gone through these with our little Bible study group, our little class meeting that we've had from time to time, and I'm willing to go through it again. In the meantime, if you have questions along these lines, all you have to do is just go to drpaulcollins.com, submit a question, or use my email, which that's on there too. And above all, go to axmediagroup.com, press the donate button. A move is in progress. In spite of a lack of funds, a supreme, very serious lack of funding, this ministry continues reaching the world with a variety of programming, very diverse, bringing you the truth as we experience it and hear it and report it. Anyway, go to amg.com, axmediagroup.com, press the donate button, follow the prompts. They'll tell you how to do it. Folks, some have been asking for $5. I'm going to be bold. There's a whole bunch of you out there that you'll lose $20 before the day is over. Don't lose it. Go online, punch the button, and give $20 and help us, because January 1 will be in a new location. More about that another time. I'm out of time. You stay blessed. You hear?